against her thigh. Despair junkie, she muttered to herself. That's really pitiful. She'd been in the shower long enough to finish the Smith twitch anyway and get thirsty for another one. Thirsty for something. She'd successfully avoided thinking about the Goldberg boy for a while, but not really. How could she? Little Michael Goldberg. Jessie Flanagan had gotten good at forgetting over the past few years, though. Avoiding pain at all costs. It was dumb to be in pain, if you could avoid it. Of course, that also meant avoiding close relationships, avoiding even the proximity of love, avoiding most of the natural range of human emotions. Fair enough. It might be an acceptable trade-off. She'd found that she could survive without love in her life. It sounded terrible, but it was the truth. Yes, for the moment. Especially the present moment, the trade-off was well worth it, Jessie thought. It helped get her through each day and night of the crisis. It got her through until the cocktail hour, anyway. She coped okay. She had all the right tools for survival. If she could make it as a woman cop, she could make it at anything. The other agents in the service said she had cojones. It was their idea of a compliment, so Jessie took it as one. Besides, they were spot on. She did have brass cojones. And the times she didn't, she was smart enough to fake it. At 1 o'clock in the morning, Jessie Flanagan had to take the BMW bike for a ride. She had to get out of the suffocating tiny apartment in Arlington. Had to. Her mother must have heard the door opening out to the hallway. She called to Jessie from her bedroom, maybe right out of her sleep. "Jessie? Where are you going so late? Jessie? Jessie, is that you?" "Just out, Mother." Christmas shopping at the mall. A cynical line bounced against the walls of her head. As usual, she kept it inside. She wished Christmas would go away. She dreaded the next day. Then she was gone into the night, on the BMW K1, either escaping from or chasing after her personal nightmares, her devils. It was Christmas. Had Michael Goldberg died for our sins? Was that what this was about, she thought? She refused to let herself feel all the guilt. It was Christmas, and Christ had already died for everyone's sins, even Jessie Flanagan's sins. She was feeling a little crazy. No, she was feeling a lot crazy, but she could take control. Always take control. That's what she would do now. She sang Winter Wonderland at 110 miles an hour on the open highway heading out of Washington. She wasn't afraid of very much, but this time she was afraid. Chapter 19. In some parts of Washington and the nearby suburbs of Maryland and Virginia, house-by-house searches were conducted on Christmas morning. Police, blue and whites, toured the streets downtown. They loudly broadcasted over their PA systems. "We are looking for Maggie Rose Dunn. Maggie is 9 years old. Maggie has long blonde hair. Maggie is 4 feet 3 inches tall and weighs 72 pounds. A substantial reward is offered for any information leading to Maggie's safe return." Inside the house, a half-dozen FBI agents worked more closely than ever with the Dunns. Both Catherine Rose and Tom Dunn were terribly shaken by Michael's death. Catherine suddenly looked 10 years older. We all waited for the next call from Sinigi. It had occurred to me that Gary Sinigi was going to call the Dunns on Christmas Day. I was beginning to feel as if I knew him a little. I wanted him to call. Wanted him to start moving. To make the first big mistake. I wanted to get him. At around 11 on Christmas morning, the hostage rescue team was hurriedly called together in the Dunns' formal sitting room. There were close to 20 of us now, all at the mercy of the FBI for vital information. The house was buzzing. What had the son of Lindbergh done? We hadn't been given much information yet. We did know that a telegram had been delivered to the Dunn house. It wasn't being treated like any of the previous crank messages. It had to be Sinigi. FBI agents had monopolized the house phones for the past 15 minutes or so. Special Agent Scorse arrived back at the house just before 11:30, probably coming from his own family's Christmas. Chief Pittman swept in 5 minutes later. The police commissioner had been called. This is getting to be a real bad deal, being left in the dark all the time. Sampson slouched against the room's mantel. When Sampson slouches, he's only around 6'7". The fibbers don't trust us. We trust them even less than we did at the get-go. We didn't trust the FBI in the beginning, I reminded him. You're right about that, Sampson grinned. I could see myself reflected in his wayfarers, and I looked small. I wondered if the whole world looked tiny from Sampson's vantage point. Our boy send the Western Union? He asked me. That's what the FBI thinks. It's probably just his way of saying Merry Christmas. Maybe he wants to be part of a family. Sampson peered at me over the tops of his dark glasses. Thank you, Dr. Freud. Agent Scorse was working his way to the front of the room. Along the way, he picked up Chief Pittman. They shook hands. Good community relations at work. We received another message that appears to be from Gary Sinigi, Scorse announced as soon as he was in front of us. He had an odd way of stretching his neck and twisting his head from side to side when he was nervous. He did that a few times as he began to speak. I'll read it to you. It's addressed to the Dunns. Dear Catherine and Tom, how about $10 million? 2 in cash, rest in negotiable securities and diamonds. In Miami Beach. MR doing fine so far. Trust me. Tomorrow's big day. Have a merry, son of L. Within 15 minutes of its arrival, the telegram had been traced to a Western Union office on Collins Avenue in Miami Beach. FBI agents immediately descended on the office to interview the manager and clerks. They didn't learn a thing. Exactly the way the rest of the investigation had been going so far. We had no choice but to leave for Miami immediately. Chapter 20. The hostage rescue team arrived at Miami Airport in Florida at about 4:30 on Christmas afternoon. Secretary Gerald Goldberg had arranged for us to fly down in a private jet supplied by the Air Force. A Miami police escort rushed us to the FBI office on Collins Avenue, near the Fontainebleau and other Gold Coast hotels. The bureau office was only 6 blocks from the Western Union office where Sinigi had sent the telegram. Had he known that? Probably he had. That was how his mind seemed to work. Sinigi was a control freak. I kept jotting down observations on him. There were already 20 pages in a notepad I kept in my jacket. I wasn't ready to write a profile of Sinigi since I had no information about his past yet. My notes were filled with all the right buzzwords, though. Organized, sadistic, methodical, controlling, perhaps hypomaniac. Was he watching us scurry around Miami now? Quite possibly he was. Maybe in another disguise. Was he remorseful about Michael Goldberg's death? Or was he entering a state of rage? Private lines of emergency switchboard operators had already been set up at the FBI office. We didn't know how Sinigi would communicate from here on. Several Miami police officers were added to the team now. So were another 200 agents from the Bureau's large force in southern Florida. Suddenly, everything was rush, rush, rush. Hurry up and wait. I wondered if Gary Sinigi had any real idea about the state of chaos he was creating as his deadline approached. Was that part of his plan, too? Was Maggie Rose Dunn really okay? Was she still alive? We would need some proof before the final exchange would be approved. At least we would ask Sinigi for physical proof. MR fine so far, trust me, he'd said. Sure thing, Gary. Bad news followed us down to Miami Beach. The preliminary autopsy report on Michael Goldberg had been faxed to the Miami Bureau office. A briefing was held immediately after we arrived, in the FBI's crisis room. We sat in a crescent arrangement of desks, each desk with its own video monitor and word processor. The room was unusually quiet. None of us really wanted to hear details about the little boy's death. A Bureau technical officer named Harold Friedman was chosen to explain the medical findings to the group. Friedman was unusual for the Bureau, to say the least. He was an Orthodox Jew, but with the build and look of a Miami Beach boy. He wore a multicolored yarmulke to the autopsy briefing. We're reasonably certain the Goldberg boy's death was accidental, he began in a deep, articulate voice. It appears that he was knocked out with a chloroform spray first, There were traces of chloroform in his nasal passages and throat. Then he was injected with secobarbital sodium, probably about 2 hours later. Secobarbital is a strong anesthetic. It also has properties which can inhibit breathing. That seems to be what happened in this case. The boy's breathing probably became irregular, then his heart and breathing stopped altogether. It wasn't painful if he remained asleep. I suspect that he did, and that he died in his sleep. There were also several broken bones, Harold Friedman went on. In spite of the Beach Boy appearance, he was somber and seemed intelligent in his reporting. We believe that the little boy was kicked and punched probably dozens of times. This had nothing to do with his death, though. The broken bones and dents on the skin were inflicted after the boy was dead. You should know that he was also sexually abused after the time of death. He was sodomized and ripped during the act. This Senigi character is a very sick puppy, Friedman offered as his first bit of editorializing. This was also one of the few real specifics we had about Gary Senigi's pathology. Evidently, he had flown into an angry rage when he discovered that Michael Goldberg was dead, or that something about his perfect plan wasn't so perfect after all. Agents and policemen shifted from buttock to buttock in their seats. I wondered if the frenzy with Michael Goldberg had a calming or insightful effect on Senigi. More than ever, I worried about the chances Maggie Rose had to survive. The hotel we were staying at was directly across the street from the Bureau branch office. It wasn't much by Miami Beach gold standards, but it did have a large terraced pool on the ocean side. Around 11, most of us had knocked off for the night. The temperature was still in the 80s. The sky was full of bright stars, and an occasional jetliner arriving from the north. Sampson and I strolled across Collins Avenue. People must have thought the Lakers were in town to play the Miami Heat. "Want to eat first, or just drink ourselves numb?" he asked me midway across the avenue. "I'm already pretty numb," I told Sampson. "I was thinking about a swim." "When in Miami Beach? You can't get a Miami Beach tan tonight." He was rolling an unlit cigarette between his lips. "That's another reason for a night swim." "I'll be operating in the lounge," Sampson said as we branched off in the lobby. "I'll be the one drawing the pretty women." "Good luck," I called to him. "It's Christmas. I hope you get a present." I got into a bathing suit and wandered out to the hotel pool. I've come to believe that the key to health is exercising, so I exercise every day, no matter where I am. I also do a lot of stretching, which can be done anytime, anywhere. The big swimming pool on the ocean side was closed, but that didn't stop me. Policemen are notorious for jaywalking, double parking, rule-breaking in general. It's our only perk. Someone else had the same idea. Somebody was swimming laps so smoothly and quietly that I hadn't noticed until I was walking among the deck chairs, feeling the cool wetness under my feet. The swimmer was a woman, in a black or dark blue swimsuit. She was slender and athletic, with long arms and longer legs. She was a pretty sight on a not-so-pretty day. Her stroke looked effortless, and it was strong and rhythmic. It seemed her private place, and I didn't want to disturb it. When she made her turn, I saw that it was Jessie Flanagan. That surprised me. It seemed out of character for the Secret Service supervisor. I finally climbed down very quietly into the opposite end of the pool and started my own laps. It was nothing beautiful or rhythmic, but my stroke gets the job done, and I can usually swim for a long time. I did 35 laps easily. I felt as if I was loosened up for the first time in a few days. The cobwebs were beginning to go away. Maybe I'd do another 20, then call it a night. Or maybe have a Christmas beer with Sampson. When I stopped for a quick blow, Jessie Flanagan was sitting right there on the edge of a lounger. A fluffy white hotel towel was thrown casually over her bare shoulders. She was pretty in the moonlight over Miami, willowy, very blonde, bright blue eyes staring at me. 50 laps, Detective Cross. She smiled, in a way that revealed a different person from the one I'd seen at work over the past few days. She seemed much more relaxed. 35. I'm not exactly in your league.